Dude, we nail this every single time.
Every single time.
Yep, every time. What's up, everybody? It's Why We Roll, the tabletop role-playing game chat show from the Stillfleet Studio. As always, I am Chris Pickett, and I am joined by my wonderful co-host.
Wythe Marschall.
Yeah, that's him. Today we're very stoked. We have a very special guest on. We're joined by the creator of Plasmatics, which is... Wait, hold on. I'm going to do that again. I need to read this thing. All right.
I switch up the order every time I say it. So
yeah. All right. So yeah, we're really excited to have on a special guest with us tonight. We have the creator of Plasmatics, Mutant Freaks in the Weird Future. Everybody say hello to Will Jobst.
hey, thanks for having me on. I'm so excited to be here to talk about mutant freaks in the mutant weird future.
Yeah.
in the freaky future.
The freaky
weirdness.
Freaky mutants in the weird future, weird mutants in the freak future,
it
future
works,
mutants in the freak. Yeah, it's great. It's really
you gotta make your subtitle to your role-playing game like a combinatory nightmare. So like
Yes.
it'll just work, no matter
no
matter how you say it.
We love that.
Yeah, could we do that with Danse Macabre, horror medieval role-playing, horror medieval?
Yeah, exactly. I think you just changed the word a little to make it make sense. But yes,
make it French.
Especially in writing 7 pages of social posts to let people know the game exists recently, I've basically done that, Chris, where it's like, this time it's historical fantasy, this time it's medieval horror fantasy, this time it's mutant apocalypse horror. It's like, word salad. Don't ever do marketing or press if you like
selling.
If you can avoid it.
If you can avoid it,
so hard. It's so difficult to sell it, and finding the way to even like talk about your game requires you to need like such foresight into kind of the experience that you want. It's not just like, here's the title, here's what we're talking about. You really need to. It's doing so much that until you write like 100 tweets and like short text for your game that's going to appear on like business cards that get thrown on the floor, like you just it's impossible.
Yeah, they get lost at Gen Con immedially.
Oh my god.
Well, Will, we're going to ask questions because we feel like you could offer some really good advice and your games are super cool. But we're also going to ask a lot of questions about Plasmatics, which is like the new game, and it's big, it's cool, it's weird, it's very much our thing, body horror and whatnot.
Sweet.
Before we get into all that, there is a traditional first question, which we always ask, which is just like, how did you get into games, physical games, story games, however you want to take it, overall? Like, what led you down this path of being like, I'm a mutant freak in the weird future in my head?
Yeah. I love this question, and I love saying that like I experimented in college and figured it out. The classic thing where you hear, I'm saying like everybody's had this experience, but reading about like D&D and the experiences that people had and be like, oh, this sounds like really incredible improvisational art. I would like to try this. And then kind of reverse engineering a game of 4E with my roommate, doing a one GM, one player game. And then it was like all rapidly downhill from there. Got into story games very quickly as someone into like outsider, interesting, cool indie art in general. Just went right there after getting my toes wet with other role-playing games like Fate or like Numenera, and then just looked for it like a stronger and more consistent high. And so that led me to indie role-playing games, the zine scene, everything like that. And I think about super cool game designers who have like gotten really big that still love like independent role-playing outsider cool design. And that's kind of where I want to be. So that's where I started, and where I would like to be is like wandering around Gen Con, finding the coolest, smallest RPG at like Exalted Funeral or like Indie Press Revolution and being like, this is my new favorite thing.
Yeah, that's such a noble dream. That is, I think, a good way to encapsulate it. I would love to be there, not selling and shilling, but just meeting people and playing weird little games and buying them all and putting them in my pocket and then walking out. and just just enjoying it.
Patrick Leader is like that guy who is just walking around,
sure.
just like is a real head. And it's cool. You know, it's cool. It's still like Sim, you know, if you can be in the biz for so long and still like him, because I'm sure we can think of in all art forms, old heads who become so jaded or so interested in a certain part of it or something like that. But there's so much love, cool new stuff coming out every day. RPGs are great. I was telling my friend Jeremy, who I play board games with every Friday, I think about RPGs most of the day, every day. And so I'm down to play them whenever.
Well, same. This is a real samey Spider-Man meme vibe happening.
We're all, for those listening, we're all pointing our fingers at each other.
So
I see we got Aaron King in the chat who wrote the foreword of Plasmodics.
Oh, very nice.
Oh,
yeah. Thank God for mutants.
Well, Aaron, maybe if you have thoughts or questions, maybe tricky questions for Will, or like layups. I don't know y'all's relationship. You know, forward writers, that could be like BFF. That could be like we're playing against, you know, each other here, some tension productively.
But Aaron's like the goal, to write like Aaron. that's what we want.
Very cool. High praise. Nice. Well, we could just jump into Plasmodics. I don't know, Chris, do you want to ask some cool questions?
Yeah, that's what I was going to segue into is, you know, for those who are listening, haven't read through it or haven't heard of it yet, first of all, shame on you. Second of all, Will, could you tell us about Plasmodics? What's the game? What's the deal? What's the vibe?
Plasmodics is my tabletop role-playing game of mutant freaks in the weird future. Here's a pre-print proof that I got. So it's going to be sitting back here. I could refer to it later.
It's very colorful for listeners of the pod. It's a colorful little book. It looks beautiful.
Yeah, it's like it's got the electric colors, which are like color combinations that like vibrate when you look at them for some reason. They're, you know, if we were prey undersea, this would be like the predator that tricks us with the interesting colors. So
that's why I feel a sense of panic whenever I look at it.
Yes,
it's a deep,
exactly. You should trust that feeling. That's a good feeling. But it's a game where you play kind of humans, mostly animals, definitely aliens, and sometimes robots, moving around a gonzo sci-fi post-apocalypse, doing things with your mutations, which are the ways you're weird in your body, and your nuances, which are the ways you're weird in your mind. And so each character has this kind of beautiful quilt of weirdness that's totally unique to them, and they move through the world as a part of a group of plasmodics doing things in kind of the weird future. There are tons of mutations in this book that come from, I see you're talking about Gamma World in the chat. This is a D-make of Gamma World. If you're familiar with D-makes, a D-make is when you take a work of art, typically a video game, and you reinterpret it through the lens of an earlier or different medium, usually kind of breaking something foundational about it to put it into a different context. So Bloodborne, for example, there's a PSX remake where they make it seem like a PlayStation 1 game. And so
this is my humble brag, is that I have tattooed Lilith Bunlith, who's the creator of the Bloodborne D-make and then Bloodborne cart, but then she got a cease and desist from Sony, so now it is Nightmare Cart, which you can play in person at Wonderville in New York City. They have a beautiful cabinet of it there. Ooh. Just a little plug for friends.
Wonderville is rad. If you like games, come to Wonderville. A little plug for our homies there making arcade, indie arcade games. But yeah, D-make. This is a fascinating concept, and in TTRPGs, I must say, maybe I'm just behind the curve here. I have not heard this being used a lot. So, Will, I'm curious how you got into how did that come up as like I'm going to do a D-make. Take like old classic mutant apocalypse stuff and do something new, but it's not a refreshing, it's something else. It's orthogonal, it sounds like.
It's not like OSE or any of the kind of BS clones that we saw through the last couple of decades.
Right. And those are like very particular goal-driven designs, like OSE in particular being like, we have a specific target that we want to hit. We want all of these like playable BX modules, but inside of like a coherent system. And Plasmonics is more like, what if you put Gamma World in the microwave for 90 minutes? Like what goes on when you open it? What are the fumes that you choke on when it opens? And so, yeah, Gamma World. I had a very formative Gamma World experience in like 2018, 2019, where we played the game like really close to how the rules are written. And if you've ever read the first edition of Gamma World, that is an incredible ask to do. It's not impossible. But this is when in the PowerPoint, I would go to the artifact identification table, which looks like a hedge, like a a briar's patch of flowcharts. And we played it like specifically to go exactly as the rules say, to really get this like kind of archaeological vibe, playing the game without the play culture that would have supported it. And we did the same group. We did it for AD&D, played Keep on the Borderlands, among some other things. But that one was so fascinating because of how fun the mutant generation process is in that, and how much play and role-playing opportunities that is. One of the big elements for me that brought that out was there's like a heat ray vision mutation in there, and it requires you to like stare at something for a number of minutes before it like explodes. And so it required the party to like concoct a situation in which they had to like maintain eye contact on something for like 5 to 10 minutes in game time to like make it happen. And it just like was such a fascinating little nugget of role playing and humor. And so you might be able to tell in the game that like all the mutations specifically want to do both those things, want to like have super interesting things to say about what's possible at the table, and also be a joke for the players to deliver whenever they use it.
I really like
and they're not I like them too, because reading through them, they're not overly prescriptive. You do have like great role-playing hooks that's associated with each one. I forget the name of it, the one where you're either the big guy or the little guy.
Parasitic attachment or symbiotic attachment. Yeah,
symbiotic attachment. That's the one. And it's just like if you're the little guy, the note that you get with that is you're the little guy with big guy aspirations. That's great.
Yeah, and the big guy one is you're the big guy. Responsibilities is the
the
and
monkey's
so
paw.
it was really fun and difficult to write them because of how many levels of punch up I would have to do. And I'm sure as RPG designers, you've been there with like writing abilities or writing class features or things like that.
Yeah, for sure.
Where you're like, is this working? Like, is this at the table? Is this fun to use? Does this feel like an option? And then I had to do like joke punch up on them to be like, is this funny still? Like,
yeah, I was going to ask about that time, just to dwell a little bit in the era of Gamma World. I don't know without looking at like the Wikipedia page, but Will, do you know Metamorphosis Alpha? And do you know off the top of your head its relationship to Gamma World? Because that was the one that for me, like early OSR, getting a PDF of that blew my mind for those reasons you're stating of like, wait a second, the graphic design is so ugly and confusing. It's got to be a joke. But it's so early that I was like, is this a joke, or is this just how in the mid 70s, like one would have conceptualized like simulating space and doing space shit? But then you read it and you're like, no, this is a joke. Like it's like, oh, an arc ship joke and everyone's a mutant. And it was sort of like you could never disentangle like bad graphic design from jokiness. And I like the Plasmonics is actually very easy to read. It's got good graphic design, but it's clearly you're doing a little bit of the fun 70s sci-fi. Like, is it a goof? How serious is this apocalypse? Are we just having a larf? So I don't know if you can speak to that in that kind of era in general, and what that influence was like in terms of sort of seriousness, I guess.
Same author for Metamorphosis Alpha and the first edition of Gamma World, Jim Jacquet. And my friend John, who is the author of an incredible RPG called Sledgehammer, which is like a pocket mod Warhammer fantasy game. Go check it out. It's really good. But we played together this Gamma World, and then they were very into Metamorphosis Alpha. And for them, it has the award for saddest robots in role-playing games. So definitely check those out. And I think they are related more than just being like TSR house systems. Metamorphosis Alpha being like one of the first like spacefaring sci-fi games, which is so interesting because it is an arc ship game and it's not just like Traveler. But
it feels very different from Traveler. And to know that they came kind of from the same time period is wild.
Yeah, definitely. And it speaks to like how much sci-fi was popping off in the 70s. And so with questions like what kind of sci-fi is this in conversation with post-apocalyptic fiction, I think like Canticle for Leibowitz is a big inspiration for the quotidian humor that happens and the kind of misunderstanding and the cultural drift stuff. And if you're not familiar with Canticle for Leibowitz, if you've played Fallout, you probably are. Just like the kind of vibe that's kind of coming through. And also 70s, there's a couple like 70s revival movies that also like Turbo Kid, an Australian movie. You seen this one? It's really good.
No, I was going to suggest like
I don't
Logan's
know that,
Run, the original Battlestar.
I believe it's called
now Turbo Kid. Okay.
Yeah. And so the world of plasmodics, you have the system plasmodics and you have plasmods, which are the kind of world you play in, and it gives you your character creation options as far as like who you're connected with and these cryptic alliances, which is a transposition from a similar concept in Gamma World. They have cryptic alliances. But these are much more active. That's probably the nicest way I could talk about the Gamma World cryptic alliances. Yeah, Turbo Kid is a send up. I'm reading the chat. It's super campy. There's a moment where like a kid blasts off into the air and then like lands on someone's head, and then they become connected as like a person. Psycho Gorman might be a good reference too for like,
or like
yeah.
This sounds like Miike Takashi's movies in the 90s, like Japanese surreal sort of bizarro horror where it's sort of sci-fi and near future.
Anyone's ever made about it. Yeah. It's my favorite director. What's up? But yeah,
you can definitely see it.
Extreme, yeah. So one thing that Takashi Miike says about filmmaking, specifically from coming from doing like straight to DVD, like through the 90s, is that he's just gonna have to shoot a lot of dialogue, and it got boring to him. So he instead tried to make every single successive shot upping the stakes in some way, making it more interesting. This very like pleasurist driven, everything should be as appealing as possible. And I really identify with that. So I love that you brought that up. That's
great. No, and it's also at the same arc. I was just thinking about this the other day, just because their names are sort of similar but not the same. But Kitano Takeshi, Beat Takeshi, is like the great. He's like Robert De Niro in Japan. He's made a million movies, and they're all mob movies. And as he got older, there's less dialogue, but it's because it went in the opposite direction of lowering the stakes, and it's just old men. It's the same as Scorsese. It's like it became older and older men who are mobsters with guns, but they're mostly just like making the like I farted face, more and more. And occasionally, like one time per movie now, there used to be a shootout. By the end of the 90s, there weren't even shootouts. It was just they were just like mad at stuff. But I like that like Miike Takashi went in the direction of like sometimes you just got to pull a rocket launcher out of your back unrealistically because like I'm bored. I'm the director and I'm like fuck it, here's a rocket launcher.
And in writing this game is around the time I watched like Yakuza Apocalypse. And it's definitely pushed a million miles while still having, and same with Beat Takeshi, right? It's these like concepts that are totally pushed, but still have this heart of humanity. Like the people
and humor.
I find that like Beat Takeshi's movies in particular are some of the most life affirming things I've ever seen in my life. And it makes me very excited to make art whenever I see one of either of their movies.
It's really true. It's really they're like everything was it Life is Beautiful but with like shotguns and like old big fancy pistols. So how do you bring that to game design? So to return it to Plasmodics. So you want to do a game that's a demake of Gamma World, OG
Yes.
Gamma World / Metamorphosis Alpha era 70s sci-fi. How did you approach it? Maybe walk us through, and then we should get into some specifics so people know kind of what it is. But how did you like get going with like, I want a lot of mutations. They're kind of funny. They got to be useful.
Yeah. So one of the like textures of finding all the textures from Gamma World and bringing the feeling of play, but in updated so it's like tolerable, right? If you've ever rolled a character in Gamma World, we're gonna get really into the specifics on this. And if you're interested in like a huge deep dive, check out RTFM, Read the Fucking Manual, where we talk about Gamma World and like what's very special about that game and what is not. And that conversation was very influential. I mean, I was part of the conversation, but it was very helpful to like closely read it and find the stuff I wanted to take and then shift into this NSR weirdo gonzo role-playing experience. So in Gamma World, when you're making a character, you just get a huge number of mutations and everything is randomized, and some of the mutations can be bad to play. You can make an unplayable character, things like that. And so making sure for me that I have like 48 mutations in 4 categories. There's like physical, mental, plant, and meta mutations. And I'll just give you some examples of each, just like as we're here, because they're a little funny. Okay. So we've got gills. This is a physical mutation. You have gills and can breathe underwater. And for every mutation, you make a choice. You can either be, you're an outcast from the gill having community, or irresistible gill person charm. And that, like, in all of these, I get to bring forward the things I love about like apocalyptic fiction a lot. And so there's some water world in there. There's some stuff. For mental mutations. Also, wait, tell me which ones you would want. What's the choice?
Ooh.
Do you want us to roll?
Sec.
Because we could just roll
randomly. Oh yeah, roll D12.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. I will say the other night, we've been playing playtest of Chris's game, which we're producing now, and there's 100 mutations, and boy, are most of them really useful. But I got the one that is perhaps the currently worded worst, where it just only gives you disadvantage to attack. Oh, because you have one cool big eye, which looks cool, but is in reality, as Chris looked it up and was like, that would make you'd have horrible depth perception.
I just couldn't think of a positive to only having one eye. That was it. It's like, yeah, you have bad depth perception. And I think Divergent Path for us, Will, is like, I kind of like the Gamma World MCC model of like, well, maybe you do get a bad one.
Right.
And Wythe said there are 100 mutations in Danse Macabre, but it's like, I think 2 or 3 of them are just bad. And yeah, you happen to get kind of one of the worst ones. It's going to be massaged, but yeah.
I got a 12 on my Plasmodics roll, so whatever that means.
I'll give you my next mental one.
8.
Okay, you'll get an 8 for a plant mutation, but I think like to show like the what is my theory behind the mutations, I feel like if I was to make a Cyclops one of them would be like the Odyssey or Jason and the Argonauts level, like we're fighting a Cyclops. What does that mean? You're very susceptible to simple riddles, maybe. Would be that sounds like a nuance, another thing, but okay, so we got a 12 for a mental mutation. Pyrokinetic. You can start fires with your mind. Choose one. You can't stop the fires with your mind. Or the fires have interesting smells, colors, and prophecies.
Oh, that's kind of fun. That's a little, like fires with colorful prophecies feels very Ultraviolet Grasslands coded in a fun way. Like, what does that mean? It's a little like that heavy liquid kind of sci-fi where, okay, I can make fires with my mind, but also they're giving me prophecies. Like, wait, am I crazy? Or is this like an alien god? Kind of Philip K. Dick. Which
yeah.
So I think that one, yeah.
Nice. And then, Chris, for your plant mutation, we've got Solar Feeder. Slake your
Ooh.
thirst for sunlight. Choose one. You bloom with beauty in the sunlight, or you can't stop growing.
Ooh, I like that. I would probably choose Can't Stop Growing just because that's an
Nice.
interesting problem to have.
Yeah. And for each of these, you can use them in any like kind of tactically infinite space that you desire. But also in a fight, they're super flexible and you can use like one of 6 different like combat actions to use them, whether it's like augmenting an attack, whether it's making a weakness, stuff like that. And the plasmatics are here for a good time, but not a long time. So everything has 10 HP. You go down fast and you can call a salty run back to 1v1 the thing that killed you. And then if you win, you level up, and if you lose, you get to make a new character.
Right, yeah, and that was something I was going to ask about. 'Cause that is in Plasmatics as written. That is the only way that you
Yeah,
advance in
yeah.
level, correct? Yeah. What was the decision making around that? Like, why have it tied to just that specific mechanic instead of broadly kind of the way that a lot of games do it?
Yeah, so the first thing is why not? But also the kind of game
Oh
is
yeah.
run by having this trouble track in the middle of the table that increases every time you fail a roll and make a choice to not have consequences. And so it's kind of like a get out of trouble um, thing until it fills up, and then the trouble dice hits the table. And the trouble dice adds its value to every roll in the game. And so that represents like the current apocalypse happening or reflecting in some way. And in the world of King Tide, it's when the tidal wave hits. And so it basically amps up the stakes of every roll and makes combat really fast. And so it means that people are going to be rolling way above 10 on things. And the way that fighting works in this game, and you're seeing a little bit of my design sensibility, that to talk about like why one decision is one way, I have to talk about like the interwoven thatchwork of the other
No, yeah,
decisions.
that's great. It's all integrated, which is
Yeah.
nice to see the nuts and bolts of.
Yeah, and so when you've rolled to hit, or you don't roll to hit because it's a descended from an into the odd game, but when you roll damage, you take your weapon dice and you're going to roll them twice, but you do them one at a time. And so you roll it once and decide whether it's going to be for damage or fallout. And damage is how much hit points you do on your opponent. Sorry, I'm explaining damage on the podcast. And then we have fallout, which is kind of the effects of what you're doing. So on a 1 to 3, fallout is fine. There's no poor effects. On increasingly high value bands, worse and worse things are happening, like weakening you or getting a faction mad at you, or at the most extreme at 16 plus, the game is over. We have to make new characters. It's gone so bad. There's no coming back from this. And so it means that you're getting into salty runback situations if you really want to. And because in plasmatics, it's more about like lateral progression, like the more access I have to more factions and more stuff, this is how we're getting better. Getting new mutations or other things like that is more of a cool bonus instead of like a predictive fighting curve that we need players on.
And so that was the thing because the Fallout dice thing is great, and I feel like I've seen that in a couple games. I want to say maybe Adam Voss's.
Yeah, Cyber Metal 2012 is the big
Yeah, that's the one.
inspiration for
Yeah.
that one. Yeah.
And that I think is really elegant and super fun. And one reason I want to play this, in addition to just the overall design, the graphic design, the mutations, the writing, but the trouble system, I feel like I've seen this like countdown doom clocks in games, but in an RPG setting, as opposed to a board game setting, I've rarely seen it implemented in a way where it's so like it's clearly integral to every aspect of like my character, the world could end. But it also there's choice. Like the group can set the trouble at 1 or 6 to start. So or the trouble dice. I mean,
Yeah.
So there's a whole sort of like mechanic there that feels new enough where like, as a designer, I don't have a sense just reading like, how will this play when we play this?
Yeah. So like with both the rolling damage and Fallout as like I roll one, I choose if I roll low, I'm like, okay, that's gonna be Fallout because I don't want it to fuck me up. And then the next roll has to be damage, or you roll extremely high for the first one, like, well, that's damage, and then the next rolls might fuck you. There's lots of these moments of like, okay, we can kind of make an informed choice, but we also have to go gambling here in a second. And so the amount of like gambling that you're doing with your characters, with the situation, setting the trouble dice, if you start at a 6, and most everything will go down when you hit it. So you can set up like an auto kill on something you're trying to do, or to make sure like all your rolls are successes. Or you can have it tense up into a 6 if you need to get somewhere safe or make something happen. And in play, it's a really fun decision when the players have to determine, like, are we closer to our target that we need to do? Is this going to be bad for us? Is there a fight like in a few minutes? Maybe we want it to be a 1.
So that's like a collective. The plasmodics are talking among each other. The players really are talking among each other, and they're kind of setting the tone a little bit for like just how apocalyptic this moment.
Yeah, how
is.
bad is it gonna get?
But the world's always like about to, go to shit any minute. Which, okay, that's Tuesday. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like it's kind of set up as just like a cascade of apocalypses, if that makes sense, where it's kind of constantly rolling one into the other.
Yeah, definitely. And they can do as much as they need to like mitigate them. Like really on top players can do that, but sometimes you can't control the next tidal wave. That's just the problem.
Yeah, just like real life. But so can you talk a little about the setting? Because it is also like clearly some kind of mutant apocalypse situation, but I get the sense you're saying you could set this in many worlds, and King Tide is kind of the de facto setting in the book, right?
Yeah, King Tide is like a sun-bleached, beachy apocalypse in which we live in the floodlands. The moon's weird orbit causes like a big wave to hit whatever city you're playing in. And the way that plasmods work in King Tide is that in Plasmodics, is that you take a map of wherever you want to play, and then you just commit the apocalypse to it. So you label things, you put new locations on there, and it comes with a set of like factions that are woven together in the form of cryptic alliances, and each player will have an insider alliance and an outsider alliance, and they give you different story elements for you to bounce off of, and additionally they have different plots and protocols that they'll do when you start each session. So at the beginning of the game, there's a lot of like 13th age faction design in here. If you're familiar with that game, it also has like a ticking up dice combat mechanic called the escalation dice, and I took it and made it much weirder and swingier and dangerous here. And
much more dangerous.
Yeah, and finding out what I liked about that and what I needed to be more of a like constant and active part in each situation. And all of these things kind of combine together in what I kind of call the goose chase as a designer. It's like creating lots of goose chases for players to get in and self-directed problem solving. Do we do the thing we were planning to do last week, or do we check out this faction of unaltered human beings who have been in a submarine for 500 years who surface for the first time? Do we go talk to them and see what's up with the battle group guppy? Yeah,
this is classic. This goes back to Chaucer. The do I talk to the unaltered 500-year-old submarine mummies dilemma.
Sure,
exactly.
Yeah. The classic Chaucerian tale.
Yeah. So I mean, you have like, so you're thinking of it almost like I'm thinking apocalypse world, like fronts, like you have different factions, and they may or may not. From the GM standpoint, it's less like crawl monsters. It's more like the players are going to push the world, and the world's going to push back.
Yeah,
you can mechanicalize that, but it's not as mechanically heavy. It's more driven by it's very much player facing in that sense. They're the ones driving, moving the waters.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple mechanics like this. So at the beginning of each session, you roll for each of your cryptic alliances, and the higher you roll, the more of an impact they have on the session. And if two characters share cryptic alliances, their rolls get added together and weighted in that way. So there's a faction called the Barnacle Guard, which are robots that kept on keeping up with every sinking ship in the world. Everyone that had like an automated rescue beacon, these robots just followed a subroutine to keep the ships floating. And they're weird and they're freaky, and you might be an insider of them. You know, you're a member and can speak to their members, or you're the one who sinks the ships or something. You've like gotten on their bad side. And if players roll super high for them at the beginning of the session, if they roll low, they get a gift of some sort. So they either get a favor, a companion for a session, or some armor. But if they're outsiders and they rolled super high, there's a couple protocols that happen, and you can like key them into your session. So one of them is they're playing havoc at one of the locations that you've marked. This is like a merchant mariner community of people called the Flotilla, that after each wave hits, they kind of combine their ships together in this movable island kind of thing. And they basically just bully people around there. And each protocol kind of feeds into the next one that finally ends in a criticality, which is my word for like their kind of big faction goal that they will change the world in some way with. So there are these storylines to help guide them and have faction stories in the background for this kind of verisimilitude of like, okay, we're going to do an adventure. While that's happening, there's like some bigger stuff happening. We can go touch that if we want. Or we can do this, you know, whatever storyline we're interested in. And it also keys into artifacts in the game, which I mentioned at the beginning with the big bramble of artifact identification. These are other like modular subquests that you can do, where you just find a weird steering wheel and you spend as much time as you like fucking with it to find out what it does. And in and of itself, it is like a mini game that can be its own quest, like crafting and finding the right supplies for it, or it can be a curio that you just do in downtime.
Yeah,
like that.
sounds...
I did look up the flow chart for Gamma World artifact discovery table, and yeah, that's confusing. It looks like an electrical diagram or like a circuit diagram.
Yes, and you can die identifying the artifacts, which is that's the interesting part. So like playing that and finding out like, damn, how am I gonna run that? like Wythe, I invite you to look at it because it's crazy. It is.
You're gonna hate it.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I remember with Metamorphosis Alpha, and I still have, I made as soon as I could figure out how to do screenshots. So this is like, you know, a long time, like 20 years ago, and I have screenshots of like charts from there. So it's very much, I feel like, again, that's why I asked, because it's like there's a time period when that was like normalized. It's like, yeah, just all flow charts on top of each other. It is kind of weirdly beautiful. I don't know, people would not want that in books, but I don't mind it. But
right, and I use it to like inspire the graphic design also. Let's see if I can find it. So like,
yeah, it's like a touchstone, and then you can do
like the poster on that page like includes a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
For the studio audience who's listening, there are these big like acid graphics posters in between each chapter that kind of talk about what the chapter is about. But anyway, so artifacts being another like modular element that is up to the players how much they want to goose chase it. You know, are we going to identify the steering wheel? Do we have time to check it out? And based on the kind of questions you answer or the experiences you have with it affect the end result of this artifact. So when I find the steering wheel, it could turn into, let me just spoil it. I'll give one spoiler. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Steering wheel quest resolves into drumroll.
It could either be, I love these. So if you get failures, right, in the Gamma World artifact identification, it can hurt you or kill you. And the same is true in plasmatics, that there are break effects. There's things that happen when you fail, either your nuance rolls to help ID it or your supply actions to try and like repair what this thing is. And one of the break effect for this one is that a funky little car somewhere in the city wakes up and makes its way to the party. It's going to kill you and win back its prize. If defeated, it will return in a week. And then it gives stats for what the car is like. And then I even have a car. This whole place is underwater. If your apocalypse doesn't have cars, first of all, sorry. Second of all, replace car with submarine, flying machine, or whatever vehicle the plasmatics may need.
First of all, suck. What are you going to do about it?
And then so it can be one of like 3 potential options, depending on how many failures you get. So the more failures, the more different it is. It's not like one is better or the other. No failures is definitely more flexible. I'll let you decide. So this is no failures. It turns into the any pass you drive. The device transforms any object it's plugged into a vehicle, no matter the material, size, or weight. Wrest control of the world. Then we've got one failure, which is the Saturn No Look 2044. In my world, Saturn didn't go out of business. The artifact is simply the visible portion of a sport utility vehicle that has been silently following you during the entire identification process. It's spacious, luxurious, invisible, and smells like a new car. Still laughing at my own jokes. We've got 2 failures. The final one, the Jalopy EX. If you surround this device with enough materials, it'll make a car. The car may disintegrate after a journey, but that's as fine as long as the junk stays in one place. And these kind of represent, the breadth of things that you can get. It's a powerful item, and all of it's taking the texture of playing Gamma World, and then it's like, what if you pushed it as far as it could go with as much story potential in every direction. And that was the goal.
I really love that, because like you could do the simulationism of like, what is the thing, and then it has to be one thing, or you can use tables and randomness to be like, I don't know, like it can be a range of things. Maybe how well did you roll? How hard did you try? And to your point, those things might be more story hooks, and then like, okay, it's a tool, you log it on your sheet, and then you do or don't use it until 5 fights later. You're like, I need to throw an invisible car at the big shark boss,
Yeah, when we played Gamma World, we kept on identifying, because you don't know what the artifact is when you pick it up. It kind of like creates itself when you find it. Weakness. That game design is weakness exiting the mind. But
oh my god,
they always turned out to be bombs. We identified bomb after bomb, so many fucking bombs, and we ended the campaign
a lot of bombs.
On a neutron bomb exploding, which is why the Fallout track.
It's so 70s. Yeah. I'm thinking of Paranoia. All these games, they're like everything is responding to like Red Army faction and like all the political assassinations back home, and
nuclear
still the threat of
and
the atomic mindset, but like 20 years on, where it's like a joke. So it's like, oh, ha ha ha! Everything you find is secretly a fucking neutron.
We're all gonna die.
It's
great.
Paranoia is a huge inspiration for this, obviously, with the factions just hitting each other constantly, but also literally in that example, the famous Paranoia adventure where you have to guard the invisible tank, and it's about, is it there? Like, what are we here for?
Are we actually guarding anything right now?
Exactly. And definitely from an adventure design perspective, I wanted to bring in the Paranoia, like on the surface silliness with, as we were talking about, like Beat Takeshi, the kind of like human aspects underneath, the people problems that make all of these things meaningful. Like, I'm sitting here with a guy and we're guarding an invisible tank. We're going to talk about something. So one of us is going to make a decision we'll regret.
Yeah, that's the weak part of like Paranoia, is you don't have a character who feels real enough because you're trying so hard to be a joke about politics. You're trying so hard to be like a weird, like either right libertarian or like Trotskyist joke about Stalinists, but it's so out of, it's completely out of context at this point. And I feel like with a game like Plasmatics, or I would hope Stillfleet too, it's closer, it's newer for one, and you're able to like enjoy the sci-fi, make fun of it, make fun of your social position, and also just play a character, even if like in our game, like you're a kind of gummy bear, salamander, or you're like a lot of them are like versions of robots, some of which are like just hard drives that someone else has to hold. And that's always, I didn't even write that in, but like at the beginning of those sessions, the players turn to other players and like, who's gonna like put me in your pocket? And it's like a weirdly human moment of like, oh yeah, like you can't move, like you have to be stored. And so I think there's those human moments that you can kind of create in games, apparently accidentally, but yes, you could also try to design the human, even with the weirdest bodies, the weirdest freakish, weird freak future.
Yeah.
That's the Ninja Turtles
Weird,
kind of subtext.
weird mutants in a weird future mutants getting weird.
Or
alternatively, you can just put bombs everywhere and see what happens when the
or
characters
just
find
bombs,
them.
or everything is terrorism, but like just some sort of unknown.
But I really like how you said that with, it's about in mutation fiction, like apocalypse fiction, it's very important, like our differences make us who we are. Like that is the special thing about us. And so little Mr. Rogers moment, but that's what I believe in the game. Okay.
Yeah, no, that is really beautiful. Well, yeah, I mean, we could talk all day about any of these themes: artifacts, mutations. I got more rules questions. One just quick question is, Will, are there going to be other settings, other plasmods beyond King Tide that you're working on, perhaps in the background, like any follow up, or do you see this as a one and done, or you're not sure?
Yeah, I also have a follow up question to that afterwards.
Sure. So right now I'm working on the Adventure Collection, which is set in King Tide. It's called Vermiculture. It'll come out when the book comes out, but it's about all of these bunkers that have surfaced after 500 years of, we thought the world was over. And each bunker itself is a ideation from a billionaire about what the future should be like. And so inside they're just like wicked, twisted, and freaky. And
so it's seasteading taken to its logical conclusion.
Yeah. So one is like the Gwyneth Paltrow goop culture, and they're called cultures instead of bunkers because like we are creating an ideal reality. We've got like a Peter Thiel blood boy thing going on down there. And so as the plasmatics play the vultures that go into, they're the first contact to these people. And it's about what do they do when they enter this weird situation? How do they impact a social hierarchy as they hit it? So that's to say, I feel like I've got lots of stories to tell in King Tide, including in Vermiculture, and then Whale Food, which is a pamphlet adventure that'll come out with it too. But I for sure have a weird fantasy mod that I've been really thinking about on this one. But
exciting.
I feel, I've heard there's some other authors working on their own plasmods, and the Desi's and Dragons crew played like an interconnected series of like 4 different plasmods through different stages, ends of eras, which was really fascinating. So I'll put out it would be very nice to make a guide to how to make these, because it's mostly about making up factions while you still use the mutations and all the hard like game design stuff from plasmatics. You just do your cool factions and stuff like that. But
yeah, that was actually going to be my follow-up question is are there any kind of like guide rails in place for producing your own world, your own actions, like if there's any like hard mechanics written in for that, or if that's more of you just have the example of King Tide and kind of vibe off of that.
I will definitely make something that's like, I say in the book that it's kind of like this is the cartridge that you put into the system, right? Like you are putting the kind of most flavorful pieces that you like into this mechanical background. So I would like to see as many as possible, and I'm sure I'm going to have cool ideas for apocalypses because it always happens.
Well, I love the idea of constant apocalypse recently, just because it seems like every game designer we're talking to, I'm thinking of Nostos, Chris, Erica's game about the ends of things. And I was just thinking about some scientists published a paper on the Silurian hypothesis, which is basically it's after Doctor Who, like evil reptile guys. But the idea is like, what could science ever tell about a civilization after 100 million years of like geology? And the answer is probably nothing. Like it's
Yeah.
there are, so they sort of end up listing like these kind of key, like, okay, lots of sort of elements that are not normally in nature. You'd see like a stratum. So you could see, even if we all disappear tomorrow and the buildings disappear, you'd see it in the rocks. But it's an interesting debate around like, how do we know for sure that there wasn't an advanced civilization? It's very like Conan the Barbarian. Like, I don't know, maybe it was just a really long time ago. And they built a bunch of stuff and it all went. So I think it's interesting to think
Maybe it
like
was ancient Mu.
yeah, and you could just kind of like take that and run with it, and game designers obviously do, but it's like now you have these NASA, astrobiologists thinking about like, how do you see this stuff? But I think it says something that everyone is, it's that, we've talked about it before in this show, many people have talked about it in many shows, the failure to imagine a next thing after capitalism,
Right.
after hegemonic neoliberal global capitalism. And I think one of the things that we're seeing is people are imagining enclaves, and cargo cults.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons is because we feel so connected, but not necessarily, we're not feeling the good versions of connection right now. We're feeling mostly the stressed out, like, why is my boss texting me? It's after 5,
Right.
it's like not good. And you almost wonder, like, would it be, do you want to return to enclaves, to little bubbles, and do that Fallout, very classic SF thing of like discovering other little enclaves and having to kind of have human connections, or in this case, inhuman looking, but human feeling connections. So I just wonder if that's what's driving some of these games about like, yeah, the world's ended. Now there's lots of little worlds and they have to like integrate. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, so much in that I agree with. And one of them being like a failure to imagine a speculative future that does not revolve around cannibalism, or like we immediately get turned into like so something in prepper communities is this like 3-day phenomena that like within 3 days preppers think we will be eating each other. And so and the answer is like
no.
in our lives, like we have experienced hardship as communities for longer than 3 days. And it like a very simple examples like the New York blackout, right? Like we just actually begin to help each other. And you just find it like post-disaster. So one of the goals,
or like I'm sorry, like the Nakba, or like the after the second Intifada, like after 2005, people in Palestine didn't start eating each other, and guess what? They still haven't in the middle of a war, in the genocide.
Exactly.
So it's like, it doesn't seem like if you're eating someone after 3 days, you really didn't look hard enough for like, is there some canned food left? I don't, you know what I mean?
It's what these preppers think. And it was very difficult to read that stuff while making vermiculture. But so one of the like, when you talk about this failure to imagine, one of the like secret goals of Plasmodics was to imagine a future that has no guns and no money. And so what does that look like? There's no money in the game. In vermiculture, people will like offer to pay you tens of thousands of dollars to do something, and it just like doesn't mean anything to you. It's just like useless stuff. And so imagining like speculative futures without guns opens up lots of really exciting stuff, and imagining futures without capitalism and capital like creates these communities, enclaves, collaborating, opening up, closing down, these kinds of struggles and interesting stories.
We love that.
Yeah, it feels like it's also a apocalyptic narratives are a good space to play around in games and to imagine together what is the next step.
Exactly. And that's, I think, Chris, kind of what we've forged our game making around. Like one reason we decided to be a company and make games together a certain way, as opposed to just individually posting stuff, was like, well, let's, we sort of feel like TTRPGs are uniquely good at that, because unlike video games, you kind of always have to hack them apart with real humans, even if there are rules. And even Will, to your point, you're trying to follow the rules, you still end up being like, you kind of like the rules exceed themselves, or so, there's some sort of argument there. So they're really good at that particular act of like, okay, let's not imagine, right? It's just this sort of, frankly, the classic D&D thing of like, you're basically getting paid ye olde silver dollars, but they're still basically dollars to do jobs. And I don't want to do work now. I definitely don't want to do work if I'm a cool elf ranger. That's like, why would I be like a gig worker when, I could be anything else?
Exactly.
So, Chris, questions for Will. Sorry, I hope I didn't take us on a tangent there, but
no, not at all. Well, how are we doing on time?
We're doing great. I was just tossing it back to you. I feel like I talked a lot, so just seeing if there's anything that come up you wanted to kind of come back to before we move along.
No, I didn't have anything on that thread.
Okay. Well, then I just wanted to turn before we move to wrap up. Will, I feel like you could probably offer some advice to folks. I feel like you've written a lot of games, designed a lot of games, and we always ask people this kind of in general. But we were talking a little before the show started also about like, man, planning a Kickstarter, doing social media, it's a schlep. It's a lot. So how do you, I mean, take it however you want. Also, I feel like you have a lot of games that are maybe shorter. You do have some longer games like Plasmatics. So I don't know, any thoughts on just generally, process, and especially in this day and age, how to do this more as a business, or how to get games to find a player base? Because I think it's easy to write cool stuff, but it's not always easy to sort of activate other people to play it beyond, like, reading it is one thing, buying it and reading it, but actually making your plasmods, finding out that your car is actually invisible and evil. How do you get to that
point? So first thing, my two friends here about to run a Kickstarter with Adam Vass. We recorded 3 episodes of our podcast, The Brain Trust, this season, opening up with Kickstarter, just answering questions from our community, how we handle the mental side of Kickstarter, best practice that we've learned, because we've run every success level of Kickstarter, if you know what I mean. We've done ones where we barely made it over, funding for like 36 days. I've done a Kickstarter for that long, and ones that were much simpler, and all the things that we learned on the way. So I would say definitely check that out, because our community asks a lot of really great questions. We talk about stuff like, what is the goal? Like, what's the ultimate goal of crowdfunding? And is it here to stay? All that stuff. What do you do when you hit the button? What video games should you have at the ready? Like that kind of stuff. As far as like, if I was going to give game design advice or just like creation advice, it is that it can be published or it can be perfect. I think that's a big one. So you should like understand that nothing will ever make it out of your hands without some kind of thing that you would want to change afterwards. And additionally, the corollary to that is that your release of your game is only one moment in the life of that creative work, right? So like, it's had its whole life before that moment, and it will have a life after it. And you can come back, you can revisit things, you can change things down the line. And so I think those two together like embody a lot of my philosophy for making art. And I think I've got more specific advice for like making constraints for yourself, having big themes, having like thematic pieces in work. But I think those two will get you really far as far as just like getting a zine out there. Being in community with people means, as we talked at like the beginning of the show, being legitimately interested in the art of your peers is why we're here. So it's a lot more simple ways to make money, right?
Oh yeah. No, that's really good advice. So I think that's an excellent, just overall starting place. And I'll definitely have to listen to that. You all have a great podcast, and I'm interested. It would not even have occurred to me that you would have run like a 36-day or like just made it over the hump. Although I think kind of probably one of the, I don't know if this is totally true, but I sort of feel like maybe it's an open secret that most people have had either failures or like,
definitely.
They just made it over. Like they didn't really, they hit the goal that they posted, but like your real goal is higher than that. If you've ever printed these things, they're expensive. To your point, it's not a lucrative business. It's a luxury business with high cost. Yeah, shit is complicated.
High cost, low margins. Lots of
cost, low margin. Yeah, getting that tattoo.
Maybe. That's going to be the chess piece I get soon.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Chris, is there anything you would want to ask Will in terms of game design? We sort of talked about the mutations and some of that demaking. I'm wondering if there's anything else specific game design wise related to plasmatics that we want to surface. It is a really cool book. I definitely suggest people check it out for sure. If you didn't back Kickstarter,
yeah, you got to pick it up. It's incredible. I was curious, Will. You had mentioned having some like restraints on yourself while designing, and I also find that having restraints can be really productive and really useful. But could you dig into that a little bit? Like, what are some of the restraints that you put on yourself while designing a game?
Yeah, so there are some that are kind of like overall restraints that I like to do, like designing with the most simple tools available and finding good reasons to break those rules. And one of the things to get started with this idea is basically like interrogate the most basic aspects of game design, like hit points or something. Like why do we have them? Why are they here? So making things earn their case to exist.
Well, I can tell you why we have hit points is because we all need to know exactly how many 14-inch artillery shells our bodies can take before evaporating.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. But for something like plasmatics, it was like taking the textures of Gamma World and taking these specific, like scouring the table of contents and finding the mutations that I liked, and then finding my interpretations of them, or what I liked about yeah. And I'm thinking of previous games like This Discord Has Ghosts in It, which I co-designed with Adam Vess. Um, that one was specifically the constraints of like, how do we have an entire game that is located in a Discord server that kind of plays out like a LARP in one night, um, or projects like Torque, where they're very tight, like tactical constraints for how I want to make the tactical combat, and the things I specifically don't want it to be like. So it's a little bit of spite based design. Um, but as you can tell, I like to make really different things all the time. And my goal is to make one of each game. And I'm really doing a good job so far.
Do you have a
But
list? Do you have like a D1000 list of subgenres?
I have a lot of, even like, mechanically minded or like thematically minded and stuff like that. And so I think one thing I come back to is how to make the juice absolutely worth the new game squeeze. And getting as much like out of, if someone's going to take a chance on your indie TTRPG, it should be extreme. Takashi Miike 2025. But one of the like legit constraints that I have is that I ever start designing a game, it's like going to use D6s or playing cards or something. Like that's where I'm going to start. And then everything like diverges from there. But because I make such a wide breadth of stuff, and also the no guns, no money thing has been a goal for many games in a row. How far I will be able to go with that, we'll see.
But so there are some, because I think you've even in this one conversation kind of alluded to a number of these high level choices. So it's like generally the games, there's no guns, there's no money. That's not really the focus. There might be tactical, like in Torque, there's car stuff that's tactical, but it's not gun shootout tactical.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's a little boring.
Yeah. And then you have other you have like strange bodies, or sort of like these different sort of themes that might recur across games in different ways, obviously in different tones, but like you're probing some of the same themes. And to your point about mechanics, there's certain mechanics you're kind of drawn to, or whatever choices you're making. So it's interesting to see how designers end up doing that and have a lot of difference. But there's also repetition. There's also those things that are like, oh, that's a Will Jobst joint. It's Jobstian.
Yeah, sure. Jobsty.
A Will Jobst joint.
I like it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of a Spike joke right now, but I can't. A double dolly shot kind of thing.
Yeah.
I just imagine me getting closer to the camera. Yeah. And I think one piece of advice is like letting your work like exist as a snapshot of the place and time that you made the thing, and then trying to be as true to that vision while like still being able to finish it. Because working on longer term projects, I'm sure you're both familiar with this feeling, but it kind of becomes such a close part of your life that you want to update it with every new thing that you learn. and
Yeah.
it creates
Yeah.
this like eternal track that it needs to go on, and that might be right for some people, but
you also can't publish that way. I mean, this is very much, and
Right.
Plasmatics, your breadth of knowledge about sci-fi reminds me of, again, working on Stillfleet and it being my first bigger game, where it's like, this could go on forever. Every week there's a new news article about science, real science,
Oh
that
my
I can
God.
turn into game fodder. But if I do that, then the game will be published in an infinite number of weeks from now. So it's like, which is really hard to build, any kind of career around. And you're like, so it's interesting to put constraints also temporally. Like, I'm gonna write up until this time period, like in my own real life, and then after that, the game is done. Basically, like maybe I can edit, but I'm not allowed to add new rules. Obviously people will find that useful or not useful, but I feel like sometimes it's not just constraint, it's like real life constraint in addition to like only d6s, or this has a playing card mechanic, that kind of stuff.
I have too much art to make. Like, we have to get over this so I can make new art. I just have to make it. I'm making it currently, and so and this definitely conversation intersects with like, how do you sell it, right? If you're done with it, how do you like keep up the relationship you have with your own work if you have worked in such a way that puts you in a bad relationship with the work, or burned out, or both, or something else? If you hate it, this happens. You still have to sell it. How do you like put up the facade that you like it? And it means that like making the game with these ideas in mind and treating it well, and it treating you well, the like creative process, it just helps every single level after you publish it. And that comes from experience, from burning myself out on games and being like, I don't actually know how to sell this because I don't like it that much, because it fucked me up making it. It's a good game, but
yeah, that's wild. The like, because they're not your babies, they're works of art. They're not people. They're objects. And so even if you're proud of it in one way,
and there's
you can also be annoyed, and
it moves from one to the other at some point, and I don't know when that is. And it's not when you publish it. Like
no, it might vary by game and by person, but right, the aura that other people see, and they might be fresh to it, and you're burned out on it, or you're just over it, and so it's kind of lost the aura, and yet for them it's new. So there's a disconnect when it becomes a commodity and travels. But I think one of the ways that to your point, it's not just like constraint, like this is the one where I did this specific thing, so cool, I'll just talk about that. And if you want a different thing, I have a different thing. I think also maybe just the community, like you're saying, like maybe the fact that some of your friends like it, or you get, for me, like getting any amount of good feedback, like the shortest itch comment, like this dope.
Oh yeah.
That I would be happy for a week, to get this dope.
Yeah, that's enough dopamine for a solid week, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I had the same thing when we recently put up the pre-launch page for the Danse Macabre Kickstarter, and we're not doing like gangbusters numbers or anything, but in the first couple of days, getting like a healthy amount of followers on that, I was like, okay, I can finish this project. I can. I'm putting baby in the world. People are like, cool baby. I like that baby.
Cool baby.
I want to play that baby.
Cool that baby. Baby.
Cool baby.
Little talking heads. And one thing that like really like spot fix Kickstarter advice I have is like, before doing any, like, say you were launching a Kickstarter from scratch and you were about to launch the pre-launch page, even just saying out loud to yourself or writing down, I want 15. 15 is good. So you can look, because the process, Kickstarter is such like a compressing evil force on your brain. Like the human mind was not meant to withstand direct contact with capitalism this way. It's really bad.
Intensity. No.
Yeah. And so with the pre-launch number, it's the only fucking input you have on the success of your project. And it flattens everything interesting about your art that's meaningful to make into that. And it's I've done a lot of Kickstarters, and it always happens every time. And instead of like trying to fix anything, I just understand that this is going to happen and try and be really mentally gracious with myself.
To your point about it's
you
that
have to
visual
be.
metaphor, the wave hitting the shore or whatever. It's like all of your creative energy, and it hits the wall of Fordism. Like we're not even up to Taylorism or neoliberalism or anything. It's just this Fordist what's the number today? Well, the number in the factory is 71. And you're like, all right, we hit 71 number.
We
And you're
did
like,
it.
what does that mean? Like I've been ass off for this guy doing the widgets and the polishing the thingamadoo.
But it does have a flattening effect. I mean, it's like likes on Instagram or social media, things like that.
Sure.
It has the same kind of effect, and yeah, it can be quite mind numbing, really.
Yeah, and in the doldrums of the Kickstarter, like in the middle of the campaign, like you will have a negative day. Like you will have a day when the number goes down, and so being ready for that. It's not like if it's going to happen. It's just something that happens. And another little piece of advice I have for my soon-to-be Kickstarters, even if you've done one before, right, is that if you like lose a pledge or something like that, it's never about you or your project. So it has literally nothing to do with you. You're not even in that conversation. But that reminds me that you can also fire your backers. So I recommend doing that. If they're fuckers, just fire them. They weren't good enough to be part of your project.
Yeah, it's a community, so there's some community management.
Yeah.
Well, Will, I feel like we should let you go, although we didn't even get to. So maybe, I don't know, tell me if y'all have time. We were going to talk maybe about historical role-playing games and just kind of history in game design. That's like a whole other side. We were talking about the future, but I know Chris and Will is really more.
But what about the past, Wythe?
What about the past? So maybe we could talk about that a little bit and then transition to kind of wrapping up and just letting people know where they can find Plasmatics and all of Will's work.
Yeah. I've made a couple historical games. I've made Black Mass, which is a game of two suspected witches fleeing the Salem witch crisis and then kind of reinventing themselves in the woods and having this big denouement. And that one is like very influenced by my time living in Boston, wandering around the woods, being in Marblehead and Salem, and then really reading as much as I could about the witch crisis. And adapting a historical event for role-playing is really hard and really fun. It's way more fun than just making stuff up, I find.
It's so nice because, I mean, I've found writing Danse Macabre, when you have these kind of kernels of narrative that you can pull from history and then ask what ifs on top of that, it just feels so rich and so generative. And it feels like you're learning but creating at the same time, which that's what always gets me.
Yeah, constraint. We're talking about constraints. That's a good one.
Yeah, that's a constraint in and of itself for sure.
One of the game designer Ken Height's biggest messages, I think, in his work is that, like, no matter what kind of speculative work you're doing, whether it's like speculative history or future or whatever, is that you should start with Earth, find like an Earth analog to the thing you're making, no matter what, because Earth has, like, it's going to sound dumb when I say it, is that it has history, but the history is all fractal and gets deeper and deeper and deeper the harder you look. Like, there simply is just so much detail. If you look up your neighborhood, like look up your neighborhood and then find out the history of your neighborhood. What land was it on originally? Who owned it? Like, who was there before? There's
I'd end up like me and find out that you live on a Superfund site in North Brooklyn.
Wow. Oh, I could have told you that, Chris. I mean, coming from the science studies perspective, you can look up not only the history with people, the culture and political history, you can look up the geophysical history and find out things like Brooklyn was literally named. It's Dutch, right? Brookland. It's got little streams, kills. And a lot of the kills are now buried, but they still are waterways and they're just underneath us. And there's like a whole group in New York that goes around and tries to like dig up and enter like these. So it's sort of like there's a national fucking treasure movie with like,
that's a
dungeon crawl stuff.
Yeah, that's an RPG right there.
Yeah, it really is. And so every element of that, like, Chris and I are working on like, medieval Paris and Chris is working on medieval Constantinople. And you look at these things and you find each of those little nuggets, the one sentence. Oh, right. In the 70s, they just dumped all the oil into Greenpoint. And we're like, oh, oops, we dumped all the oil into Greenpoint. We didn't know that it would be bad for all of the living things in Brooklyn. Who could have known?
These soap factories are leaching chemicals into the ground. Oh, whoopsie daisy.
And so anyway, blah blah blah. That's a kind of boring, sad one. But there's these little factoids. It's like, to your point, Will. It's one sentence at a time, and there's millions of those sentences. So any one of those could be, maybe if it's not the full game, maybe it's like one cool table that you write.
Yeah. But like, take your example of, I mean, you picked an amazing one, which is these people that go explore underground waterways, Stygian rivers. What the fuck?
Yeah.
And you just like, okay, instead of Brooklyn, it's on a lost Martian colony or something. And then you
the
make
canals.
you just like draw every other detail and like push it forward. There are people that have names, and you could just, human beings have been like the way we are right now forever, and they will be this way, the same kind of humor. And you can make history come alive in this way, in a way that can only happen in role-playing games. It stops being dusty. It becomes lived in, because we are reflecting the history back at each other.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, it comes alive because, in a way, the city's grown so much and changed so much and become gentrified, and now that stuff is the source of the authenticity. It has, in Chris's game, the quintessence. But it wouldn't be if we were like cabbage farmers and we were like, man, I hate this swampy cabbage land that we stole from the Algonquins. Like, it would be, just like annoying. But so it's interesting how those geophysical facts or cultural facts or whatever, they change when you make that other change. So like in Chris's game, there's a zombie mutant apocalypse, and it changes what religion means in 1390. So it's like the religious infighting, the sects on their own are super interesting, but the game isn't really about religion or these factions per se. It's about what people choose to do when faced with a greater threat, or when the environment radically changes. And to your point, Will, I think you could easily take any of these things, and you can move them as far away from the original as you want. But that original source of inspiration, it's a good note. Beyond Salem Witch Trials,
keep it to Earth.
Keep it to Earth. Any other Earth-bound inspiration game settings that you like really went deep on? You know what I mean? Like, was there any other aha moment?
So there's a game that Aaron mentioned in the chat called The Guide to Casting Phantoms and the Revolution, which is that game I talked about that I kickstarted with Adam Bass as a part of the Break Kickstarter thing, where we designed a game. Okay, get ready to like really cringe hard. This is our 36 day long campaign, and we started with no game. And through the process of each week, we recorded and put out a different podcast and took votes on what the pitch would be, what the mechanics would be, what the form factor would be, and like what the table artifact would be. And then we whittled down like 6 pitches into a game, a historical based game where you play revolutionaries using Phantasmagoria, light show, to actually summon the specters of their history and past and their cultural moment to overthrow the Sun King and shit. And in that one too, like, it's that game is old now. I don't know. We did it a long time ago. 2018, 2019 or something like that. It's weird saying that that's old, but it feels like a previous version of me. But anyway, bringing in my love for French Revolutionary history and French history in general to be reflected in finding the game design pieces and narrative design pieces where you can show and express your love for the history. And in what way you do that is one of the really exciting parts about making historical games.
Very well said. Well, we have all kinds of historical facts that we've presented to the listener, so they've now edified thoroughly. All kinds of advice. We'll really appreciate that. Plasmodics is great. Everyone should pick that up. And I know I'm going to write a plasmod about the election here in New York City, where we'll have a mutant socialist versus a mutant.
Rank Cuomo.
Don't rank Cuomo.
Don't rank
Cuomo. Don't have ranked Cuomo in the past, and just don't listen to the show if you ranked Cuomo in the past when you hear this.
You can't lie about it if you did. You have
you
to.
You can't.
Say.
We'll know.
If you did rank Cuomo.
Yeah, we'll know. Turn it off now at the end of the episode. What is wrong with you?
With that, Will, can people buy Plasmatics right now? Can they pick up Vermiculture? Can they pick up some of your recent work and check out some of these games you mentioned?
Yeah, go to goodluckpress.co. There you can find many fine role-playing games, including Plasmatics, available for pre-order. You can follow my work there. You got a newsletter you should sign up to, and I do a podcast with Adam Bass, the Brain Trust, where we talk about game design. We had done a big series on what it's like to run a Kickstarter. We'll probably do another interesting series at some point that's a little less emotionally difficult.
Sure.
But anyways, I'm on Blue Sky, also at Will_JOBST. And that's where you can find me.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much, Will, for coming on and chatting with us. This has been great. I mean, you know, as listeners know, we love mutations, we love weird little guys, we love freaks, and you bring so much of that to the table. So we appreciate you.
And you bring your own fan society. So thanks, Aaron. As ever, thanks Vex, Avi, everyone in the chat. Thanks for your questions and quips. And thanks, Chris Pickett, for engineering the show.
Hey, thanks, Wythe Marschall, for producing the show.
Well, with that, we're going to sign off. Will, any last words, any last single sentence, brilliant thoughts before I click end stream?
I'm going to go to my board game critique picture I have printed out by Sen-Fung Lim, who's an amazing game designer. I'll give you one of them. This is your board game critique. Things I'd probably tell you if I had play tested your game. Here's number one. There's way too much going on. Identify the specific experience you want to curate inside of your game's box and remove everything that takes away from that.
Oh.
Great.
Boom.
Yeah. Great mic drop moment.
Mic drop. The guy, yeah.
You can't beat that.
Flabbergasted.
Great list. It's a great list.
That's awesome. We gotta get that next.
I'm always saying this. There's too much going on. Constantly saying it.
Yeah.
Even if somebody else said it, it sounds Jobstian to me.
No, it's a one for sure, 100%. Not me. I just put it with an eye shot.
Well, thanks for introducing us to this designer. I got to get the guy's name or person's name. And yeah, Will, we would love to have you back on anytime, and we'll play some of your games. And until then, this has been Why We Roll.